Okay, I'm gonna be completely real with you here for a moment. This is the second version of this script that I've written. The original version was miles long. Due to unnecessary stuff and trying to talk about so many topics, I had to cut it down. And also, other people have already covered the topics I'm gonna be going over and probably did them better, but hey, figured I'd take a shot. Another thing, spoilers ahead, so I only encourage those who have played the entirety of Deltarune to continue. That is, well, if you even care, because I know one or two people that wouldn't really care about getting spoiled either way. So first, I want to talk about the game's bonus bosses, because everyone and their mother probably knows how these guys work, or at least who they are. They're found somewhere behind a secret door in the final area of the chapter, and you have to unlock them through convoluted fetch quests. When you beat them, they give you a shadow crystal and become an item for you, armor if you spared them, or whatever passive way you fight them, and a weapon if you fought them with actual violence. Given there's 2 chapters out right now, there's, well, 2 bonus bosses. In chapter 1, there's Jevil, the former jester of Card Castle who went insane after meeting a mysterious person. He was imprisoned in the basement because of this insanity, but he taunts others about being the one who's truly free. Then in chapter 2, we got Spamton, a businessman slash advertiser who has an unsuccessful career until talking to a strange individual on the phone. His success then skyrocketed, boosting his ego with it, until the color disappeared, and then he hit rock bottom just as fast. He also seems to have contacted a virus in his brain at this point, which has turned him into a completely unhinged and violent con man. His real self seems to be trying to desperately break free of the control of this virus, with the decayed Neo body in the basement being his main plan to do so. So I said before after beating them that they recognize your strength and become an item to help you. Well, that's actually a little shaky. On the normal route of Chapter 2, Spamton seems to become either item you get based on what you did, but in Chapter 1, Jevil only seems to become the Devil's Knife, as getting the Jevil's Tail by pacifying him has him talk about going back to sleep and simply giving the item to you. And in the Snowgrave route of Chapter 2, Spamton can only be defeated through violence when he's frozen by Noelle, yet the puppet scarf is still obtained when he is frozen solid. Granted, this can be explained by the fact the scarf seems to be made of the wires that held up his Neo form, but unlike the normal route, his consciousness is probably not in it this time. We don't have any real way of knowing how bonus bosses are gonna work from now on. All we really have right now is that Shaum tells us that we'll need something called the Shadow Mantle if we even want to hope at fighting any of the other bonus bosses we'll meet down the road. But now that we've covered those guys, let's cover roots and how they play a role in Deltarune. Chapter 1 doesn't really have any distinct roots due to it being about choices that don't matter. However, the ending can still change just a bit depending on what you do. If you decide to spare everyone you encounter, they will help you in the end by overthrowing the king, and afterwards you get to walk around and talk to them. If anyone has been defeated through violence, however, the king is simply put to sleep by Ralsei, and the citizens seem to only panic and try to break into the throne room, and Chris and Susie are urged to leave immediately. After Chapter 1 left the idea of choices not mattering in our brains, Chapter 2 blew us away with the fact that it contained a secret route. Obviously, there's the normal route where you go through Cyberworld and you do all the puzzles, you spare the people, and do all the good stuff. However, as everyone probably knows at this point, there's a secret sinister route that changes the entire course of the events of this chapter. This is the Snowgrave route, and it begins after reaching Noelle. Rather than everything I previously mentioned about doing all of the good pacifist stuff, being a goody two-shoes, this route has Chris pressure Noelle with the idea of getting stronger into going on a spree of freezing people to death throughout the city, leaving their corpses frozen about, eventually culminating into casting the spell Snowgrave on Berdly,
killing him for fucking real,
as he doesn't wake up at the end like he normally does. Noelle then leaves, and Chris takes a shortcut right to the Queen's mansion, which has been overtaken by Spamton, who, in his Neo form, is now the one guarding the fountain, going from a crazed lunatic in the normal route to the crazed anti-hero that is the only hope left for the now panicked people of Cyberworld. While initially the con artist virus in his brain was enabling the Snowgrave massacre, his real self seems to be breaking through during the final battle, trying his best to save himself and probably everyone else, even if he doesn't say so out loud. However, while his final anti-hero stand initially seems to be going in his favor, taunting Chris for trying to call for help from people they've used when brought to a standstill by his blue light special, Spamton, the final hope for Cyberworld in the apocalypse, is too frozen over when Noelle comes to aid Chris. In the aftermath of the chapter, like previously mentioned, Berdly doesn't wake up, but also, virtually nobody from Cyberworld is brought back to the main Dark World town that Rousey runs, and even in the real world, Chris is still acting weird around Noelle, who's already not thinking straight like she normally should be. With all that established, what does the introduction of potential routes with possible lasting effects mean for Deltarune? Will every chapter from now on have an alternate Sinister route where you bring an apocalypse to the respective Dark World? Is it even going to be every chapter from now on? Will it just be 2 to 6 or just the even-numbered chapters? Who knows? It also opens a can of worms for a complex string of events. Obviously, we have the all normal and all alternate route options, of course, but I'm talking complex stuff, like what if Snowgrave is the only alternate route you do? What if you do every normal route up until the last chapter? There's room for these routes to make the events of the game just as complex as Undertale's often overlooked neutral runs. And yes, while Toby did say Deltarune would end the same no matter what you did, it should be noted that we also can't trust what he says all the time. It's also worth noting that if any remnants of these Dark Worlds are left after their fountains are sealed, the lasting effects of the alternate Sinister routes could possibly also play a big role. There's a comic by Bright Goat called Aftermath that delves into this concept, as it's about the aftermath of Snowgrave. Even if you're not one who's too interested in Deltarune, because I'ma be real, I know a couple people like that, if you at least like apocalypse stuff or the feeling of dread or being chilled, I recommend you watch the dub of this comic that's on YouTube, cause the ending is quite a bone chiller. Even if you don't really get the Deltarune context, I recommend giving it a shot. Anyway, with that little side note out of the way, while we're thinking ahead, let's list some things about Chapter 3 we know or can predict, because even if Toby said that Chapters 3, 4, and 5 are going to be released together, obviously 3 is the only one we can really gather clues for right now. First off, given that the Dark World is literally in the Dreamer home, it'll probably have a similar layout. It was also opened right at the end of Chapter 2, overtaking the house while everyone's asleep right there, so Chapter 3 will likely start in their respective Dark World gung-ho. No introductions like the first 2 chapters. This chapter's Dark World also is heavily implied to have a television theme, possibly focusing on movies the most. Because of this theme, it's also probable that we're going to be meeting the fabled Mike, as Spamton in the normal route tells us that Mike is a criminal and not to believe what we see on TV. And we can support this with the fact that Jevil hinted at Queen being the antagonist of Chapter 2. Another thing we know is that Toriel will likely be in the Dark World this time, given she was right there when it overtook the house. And it's also possible that Undyne might end up being here too, given that, Toriel called the police before going to sleep, and Undyne is the main police officer we've seen. Though, of course, given that Toriel is asleep, it's also probable that the police already came and went. So, maybe don't get your hopes up on that one. The reason these two potentially being in the Dark World of Chapter 3 is big is because these two are characters we've seen before. They were in Undertale, and in that universe, they had magic. In the parallel universe of Deltarune, monsters only seem to have magic in the Dark Worlds, so what would their magic look like if they're there? Will it be similar to what they had in Undertale, or will it be different? We don't know. And while we're on the topic, let's talk chapters 3, 4, and 5 since they're coming out together. So, what about the bonus bosses and possible alternate routes? Will there even be alternate routes for all these chapters? We don't really have any way of knowing that. And what about the bonus bosses? Chapter 2 threw us a curveball by meeting Spamton halfway in rather than just at the end. So if that's possible, how do we look for these characters if the same thing happens again? Well, here's the thing. Bonus bosses have unique text patterns. They speak in mostly, if not all caps, and they lack a portrait. However, given that Toby Fox is quite a troll, now that we expect this and are going to be looking for it, the potential characters in question probably won't even have these traits until we actually, see them as the bonus bosses. Which, by the way, like I previously mentioned, we're apparently going to need the Shadow Mantle if we even want to hope at fighting them. But that's basically everything I wanted to talk about. I kind of threw like 3 separate topics together, so I only have a vague idea of what I'm calling this video, but whatever. When the time comes for chapters 3, 4, and 5, it's sure to be a blast. Until then, bye everybody!